in the world of trying to figure out what the United States is doing with foreign policy, we're in a new state here. I think it's very difficult to understand where the president of the United States wants to go in the Middle East with Iran, with the war between Israel and Hamas, in the war between Russia and Ukraine, with the president's participation in that. Does he set a 50-day deadline? Does he set a 100-day deadline? Does he set a 24-hour deadline? Or now is it a 10-day deadline? And deadline to what? What is he trying to accomplish? Where is this going? And I don't have a lot of answers today, but I've got somebody on the show who does, and that's Colonel Douglas Macgregor. Doug, we're always grateful to have you back on the show. Former defense and foreign policy analyst and former advisor to Secretary of Defense and highly decorated combat vet. Doug, welcome back to the show.
Always a pleasure.
It is always a pleasure. I hope we're going to get to some of the funner things here later on too in this show. But let's just start off with this first issue here about Trump changing this 50 days deadline that he gave to Putin himself. Now he's going to say maybe 10 or it could be 12. What do you make of this change, and why do you think it happened yesterday?
That's a good question. I think, first of all, Donald Trump is being handed a script by the people that surround him, and he's largely repeating what he's discussed in private. And what he's discussed is, well, it doesn't look like we're going to make much progress with the Russians over Ukraine. So let's ratchet up the pressure, assuming that we're putting any pressure on the Russians. And one way to do that is by shortening the deadline, as though the deadline is very meaningful, because the deadline is unclear in terms of, other than enhancing sanctions that Russia is already dealing with and potentially threatening to provide more long-range strike flexibility, I guess. There's not much to it. And of the two, the long-range strike issue is very dangerous, but he doesn't seem to understand that. So as I listen to him, I kind of think he's developed a God complex.
Well, that's scary. That's not a good thing to have this. If you believe that about yourself, it's one thing to quote believe the press about you, but if you believe you've got that kind of a complex, that can lead to some really bad decisions. For those who may have missed it, here's kind of where Trump was yesterday on this issue of a deadline.
You know, Russia could be so rich right now. Instead, they spend all their money on war. They spend everything on war and killing people, and it doesn't make sense to me. I thought he would want to end this thing quickly. I really felt it was going to end, but every time I think it's going to end, he kills people.
Could a meeting help, and are you considering it? Has been proposed?
I don't know. I'm not, I'm not so interested in talking anymore.
We'll discuss a couple things during that clip there, but the first one that really jumped out at me, and I'd like your view on this, is why he ever thought that he had a deal 5 or 4 times.
I don't know. I mean, I don't think the man is on the planet with the rest of us. I think he believes that he's God. Whatever he says is right and proper and accurate. He glosses over the fact that this war would not have ever happened if it were not for the United States. And the decisions that were taken in 2014 through the Obama administration and subsequently through his own to build up Ukraine into this existential threat to Russia's security. So, bottom line is, the first lie is, well, he just keeps on killing people. No, he's being compelled to fight this war, and he has no choice but to continue to fight it until he's achieved his objectives. I mean, it's not as though we ever sat down and listened to what Russia's legitimate national security interests are, or that we even care to listen. The second thing is, well, he could be so rich, he's spending all this money. We're the ones that are spending all the money. We have the $1 trillion defense budget. And that's not all that we spend on these wars. You've got to look at the foreign aid. You've also got to look at the intelligence agencies and the budgets, the black budget. You're looking at enormous quantities of money that are squandered routinely all over the world, not just in Ukraine and the Middle East. And it's all about subverting other people's governments, undermining other people's legitimacy. So I mean, he's not even in touch with reality. And it all goes back to this underlying assumption. That is that Russia is weak. You remember, it's always about, well, we're the liberal Democrats, we're good people, and he's an authoritarian, a dictator. Well, give me a break. When's the last time we saw the ballot box really work for the American people? The lesson from the Trump administration thus far is that the ballot box is broken and is totally meaningless. It doesn't make any damn difference who you vote for. You get the same terrible outcome. So forget all that stuff. The second part is, well, he's an authoritarian. Well, the Russians are actually thriving. Their economy is in far better condition than ours is. What have we done that singles us out and distinguishes us? We've stolen $600 billion of sovereign national wealth from Russia. And if you're going to steal $600 billion from the country, what do you expect in terms of cooperation from the government? I mean, the whole thing is preposterous. It's nonsense. I think he's completely out of touch with reality. And I think that he's going to get a dose of reality shortly if he's not careful, because the Russians are not going to roll over for him under any circumstances. And if he continues to push this nonsense, we're going to get a bloody nose. I'm talking about the United States, not just Europe.
Right. Yeah, I do worry about that. And I mean, we were kind of half jokingly said he's got a God complex, but I wonder if that's not more serious than it may have appeared, because in terms of this conversation that he had with Putin on the 3rd of July, I thought it was odd at the time why he would go at that point and ask for, again, an unconditional 30-day ceasefire when Russia has bent over backwards to tell anyone who would listen that that's not even on the table. They won't even consider that. So then when he didn't get it, and then Russia that night, which they've been doing nearly every night before and since that time, launched a very large strike in the air overnight against the Ukraine side. He took that personally. But I mean, is it, I mean, are we serious? Does he have some kind of a complex that he thinks that his force of personality would cause Putin on a telephone call to go against Putin's own self-interest?
Well, it's not a question of Putin's self-interest. Putin acts invariably in the interest of the Russian people and the Russian state. So it's not a question of personality for Putin. I think Donald Trump, again, has this misguided notion that foreign and defense policy are conducted on the basis of personal relationships. They are not. This is, to quote The Godfather, it's not personal, it's business. He doesn't seem to get that. And that's why he routinely walks around, well, I had a really good relationship with him when I was president, and I don't know what's happened, but it's ridiculous nonsense. It's crazy. None of it is grounded in reality. But you're talking about a man that reads nothing, studies nothing, and is operating with a cocktail level of familiarity with international relations, with Russia, with military power, American and Russian, American and Iranian, American and Chinese. So you're not getting anything that really makes sense out of him. So if somebody said, well, recommend you ratchet up the pressure on Russia, tell them the deadline is being moved up. Russians don't give a damn about our deadline. And we've lied so many times to the Russians about everything. I don't think they believe anything he says or we say anyhow. So at this point, we have to understand something. If you're a Russian right now and you're looking at Ukraine, and this has been true certainly since December of 2021, Ukraine is a large cancerous tumor growing on the body of Russia. Eventually, the decision was made, we've got to go in and cut out the tumor. And they're going to do that. They've largely cut the tumor out. They are annihilating what is left of the Ukrainian army, which is part of the special operation mission. You've got to annihilate that Ukrainian force that poses an existential threat to Russia. They're going out of existence. But you've got another problem, and that is that whenever you go after a tumor, any good surgeon will tell you, if you've got a cancerous tumor, a malignant tumor, you've got to cut, eliminate, remove whatever is in its vicinity. In other words, the connective tissue around it. If you don't do that and you simply remove the tumor itself, the cancer will return. It will come back, and it will come back with a vengeance. That's the problem for President Putin in the Russian general staff and the Russian military establishment. It's not enough to just rid yourself of the tumor, which manifests itself in the form of the Ukrainian army or armed forces. You've got the problem of this puppet regime, and that's all Zelensky is. Zelensky is a puppet regime. He's the puppet of Washington and London. Number two, you've got the CIA, the MI6 from London, the British intelligence operations, and the Mossad, all working together, not just in the Middle East, but also in Ukraine. They have to go. You can't accept any negotiated arrangement that results in the emergence or the restitution of another US, UK, Western puppet in Kiev. Unacceptable. Can't happen. You cannot have another military state emerge that's designed to strike at Russia. It's out of the question. And the CIA, MI6, Mossad have all got to get out. So under the circumstances right now, given the blatant ignorance of President Trump of this reality, or he's just unwilling to admit the truth. That's also a possibility. But I don't think he understands the gravity of what you and I are discussing right now. In the event that he wants a negotiated settlement, he has to understand those things are off the table. And they're not going to spend any more Russian lives or treasure unnecessarily. They're going to spend what they need to achieve the objective I just outlined. Get rid of the connected tissue as well as the tumor. We should be cognizant of that. We should understand it and get out of the business of trying to continually subvert them. This war began as a giant act of subversion aimed at undermining, destroying Russia so that the usual suspects, the financial elites in London and New York City and their backers, the neocons in Washington, D.C., could go in, divide up Russia, rape Russia, and put a puppet into power in Moscow. Well, that's over. That's failed. Donald Trump had the opportunity to distance himself from all of that and start, in a fresh direction that's in the interest of everyone, Europe, the United States, and the Russians. He didn't do it. And so now he is simply the pawn, the puppet of the same people that started this war. Nothing good will come out of this if he does not change his tune. And I don't see any evidence that he will, because he's also suffering from the God complex. I preside over the greatest nation in the world. Everyone has to do what I say. Look what I just did in Europe. They all got down on their knees and capitulated to me. Well, they capitulated, but part of the deal was you're going to continue to make this war with Russia go, because the globalist elites ruling in Europe right now are out of a job instantly as soon as it becomes clear Russia presents no threat. There's no hostility to Russia. There's none necessary. There's no war coming. So how do you justify deindustrializing your economies? How do you justify hurling your population into the Middle Ages in living standards terms, which is where they're headed right now? And then outrageous deals that may put some extra money into the oil and gas industry in the United States, but long run does nothing for us, and certainly doesn't bring any manufacturing productivity back to the United States. So the whole thing is a scam. It's another big marketing pitch. It's irrelevant, but he's riding what he thinks is this great wave, and he thinks he's God.
And you said a second ago that Zelensky is a puppet. He may not know he's a puppet. He may also have his own version of a God complex, because here's how he reacted to Trump's comment about the 10-day deadline.
Today, there is an extremely important statement of President Trump, and this is true. It is Russia that does everything to break the peace efforts and delay this war. Every night, strikes, constant Russian attempts to hurt Ukraine. Indeed, there can be peace if you act strongly and decisively. And we have repeatedly said, and all partners know, that sanctions are a key element. Russia respects sanctions, respects such losses. Peace, however strong, is possible. Ukraine, as always, is ready to work as productively as possible for America. to work with President Trump in order to end this war with dignity and lasting peace.
So either he has totally lost contact with reality and thinking that anything positive from his perspective is possible on the battlefield, or he's just a willing participant, whether it's a puppet or just a co-conspirator in keeping the war going as long as they can. I mean, how do you see it?
Both he and the president are puppets in the same theater. This is what people don't understand. Look at the people that surround President Trump. Look at the people that contributed to his campaign to elect him to office. They are driving policy. They are driving it in the Middle East. They are driving it in Europe. They want Russia to be destroyed. Now, Russia is not going to be destroyed. That's very obvious. But the same people are unwilling under any circumstances to admit that they may have miscalculated, that they may have been wrong. And you know who is very uncomfortable ever admitting that he's wrong about anything is Donald Trump. So Donald Trump is much more at ease threatening and bullying than he is at stepping forward and saying, you know, this war was a mistake and we've got to get beyond this. And therefore, we have to have a team sit down, establish Russia's interests, what they are and what they demand, understand clearly, and see if we can find a way to breathe life into the comatose body of this nation called Ukraine. But he's not prepared to do that. The other puppet in Kiev is going to continue to sing that song until he is dead or removed. He has no alternative. He can do nothing else, because to do something else would result in his immediate replacement by a new puppet who would sing the tune. Remember, everything is being financed, driven, directed, and orchestrated from London and Washington, D.C., and especially New York City. Who's doing it? Who are the billionaire oligarchs that are demanding these actions and pushing these policies? Whom have they purchased on the Hill? Whenever you listen to Senator Lindsey Graham speak, all you have to do is look at his donors. Where does his money come from? And all of a sudden you begin to figure out, my gosh, I guess there's a reason he says what he does. Well, the same thing is true for President Trump and this man Zelensky. It's not a clear-cut division. President Trump is an independent, free agent who thinks on his own, decides on his own, after consulting with people that are well-informed and informing himself. No, it's not that. It has never been that. How else do you go from the Trump of 2024 campaigning and talking about we've got to end these conflicts. We've got to disengage from these. We've got to promote peace and stability. I want to bring back manufacturing. I want to promote prosperity. And oh, by the way, that Epstein file needs to be released. There has to be accountability and transparency in government. What's happened to all of that? It's gone.
That's a great point.
Because the people that elected him are not interested in those things. And they don't give a damn about the American people or you and me or anybody else. And who are these generals that run around and make these outrageous statements? You know, just a couple of years ago, we had some Navy admiral talking about fighting and winning a nuclear war. Now we have this man, Donahue, one of the co-architects of the disaster associated with disengaging from Afghanistan, who for his incompetence has now been promoted to 4 stars. And he's now threatening the Russians over Kaliningrad, this small slice of East Prussia that was given to Stalin by FDR towards the end of the war. Well, I think that's regrettable. I'm sorry East Prussia went out of business. I'm sorry Prussia went out of business. But unfortunately, it's out. It's done. We can't reverse that now. And the Russians actually tried to sell it, by the way, when Gorbachev was in power, when the Germans were buying East Germany. But the theory was we've spent too much money already, so they didn't buy East Prussia. Well, the Russians have made good use of East Prussia. They've got a port there. They've built factories there. They have a population there. They have actually restored much of what was German and Prussian in East Prussia. It treated the Germans very well. I think the bottom line is you can't reverse this and you shouldn't try. That's done. Nobody goes to war over that now. That's sort of like Taiwan. You know, Taiwan actually speaks Chinese. I mean, what do you want to do? Make them speak Japanese? I mean, this is insane. The whole thing is crazy. But we're engaged in this. And here's a general that steps up and says, in a few days, we can run right over this and take it. This is also an architect of many failed operations back on the Dnieper River, down near Kherson. You're familiar with that, Dave.
He's got a really awful track record, both in the withdrawing from Afghanistan and in the offensive in 2023. Just hideous.
Well, remember when we were on active duty, how many times did people repeat the old adage in our officer corps? Screw up, move up.
Move up.
And that's what's happened. There's been no accountability, no transparency. But he's one of our guys. We're going to push him forward. One of our guys. That means he'll repeat whatever stupidity you want him to, and he'll try to execute it as long as it doesn't come at the cost of his life.
And that's in the military realm, and you're talking about I guess this globalist elite, whatever, who wants this. I think that also extends into influence people, especially on major television networks, because that's where they still live right there. And here is Bill Browder on, I think it's Times Radio video broadcast that they do a lot, repeating some of the same things that Trump did, talking like what he said is a really good idea.
I look to the Lindsey Graham secondary sanctions bill, which would impose 500% sanctions or tariffs on countries that buy Russian oil. So if you're China or India or Turkey and you're buying Russian oil, and all of a sudden you see the prospect of 500% tariffs on all your goods going to America, I mean, where are you, whose side are you going to be on? You're going to be on your own side, and you're going to say, you know what, it was nice having that cheap Russian oil, but I'm not going to risk everything else I'm doing for that and let the Russians sell their oil to somebody else. And if that were to happen, the Russian oil would eventually find its way into the market somehow, but it would find its way into the market at like $20 a barrel. And if that were the case, they'd find themselves pretty much out of business in a short order, because the only thing that keeps Russia going right now is the sale of oil. If they don't have the sale of oil, they can't afford the war. And if they can't afford the war, then they're forced to come to the negotiating table.
I mean, do you think that somebody that's of his stature is really not understanding that those sanctions are not going to work against China and India? It's not going to result in weakening Russia, or that
what do you mean
oil
by
could go down to 50?
What do you mean by stature?
Well, he's being billed as this expert by Times Radio, and he's put up because he looks good, et cetera. So he's being promoted as a stature.
Where does he live? Is he living in New York City right now, or is he back in London?
That I don't know.
Well, you've got to know something about Bill Browder. He comes from a long line of communists. He was one of these people that loved the Soviet Union, but when the Soviet Union went into bankruptcy and declined, he decided to go over, like a lot of other people, and try to rape it, steal from it. He was on the verge of being arrested when Putin was president and thrown into jail. This is someone who has got an agenda that has nothing to do with the American people of the United States or Europe. This is an anti-European. This is worse than the average globalist. This is somebody who would have been quite content to work in the NKVD and starve or murder millions of people. Browder is the last person I would consult with on anything to do with Russia. There's a whole class of people like Browder that many of whom were caught and executed, and large numbers of whom unfortunately escaped justice in Russia. Anything this man says is poison. So I would pay absolutely no attention to it. The notion that Russia is dependent upon oil, it's back to John McCain, a gas station with nuclear weapons. Really? Is that really what people think? That's absurd. Russia is a critical component part of the global economy. What is it now in the world? 3 or 4? It's enormously productive and successful. It's growing more so with each passing day. He's just sorry that he can't go in there, tear it to pieces, rape it, and make himself rich as a result. I think he's the last person I would listen to on.
Right. No, that's the point. That's the last person you would listen to because you're intelligent and you're knowledgeable. But most people aren't, and so they listen because he looks good on camera. But is that narrative something that's pushed by people who want to support what President Trump's doing for whatever their reasons
Well,
are?
I'm sure that Tony Blinken and Howard Lutnick and Steve Witkoff and was it Feinberg and any number of people serving in the NSC staff and in the administration, all of these Israel firsters, I'm sure, would sign on for that immediately. The Israel First group is, to a man, anti-Russian. And this has to do with the histories of their backgrounds and their families and their hatred for Russia and Orthodox Christianity. It's just a waste of time listening to these people. We have to be, if we're going to survive on this planet, we have to be Americans first. And America first needs to be our guide. That's why people went out and voted for Trump. What was an act of faith? He said the right things and people wanted to believe he was serious. He wasn't. He lied. It's all a myth. And so we're involved in agendas like Browder's, whether it's in Russia or operations that are going on now in the Middle East. Right now, you've got these people that are trying to build this corridor that runs from Israel through Syria, along the border with Iran, all the way up to Azerbaijan, in order to sort of circle Iran and split ultimately through Azerbaijan, Russia from Iran. I mean, all this stuff is interconnected. All the same people are behind this stuff. It's catastrophic for us. It's irrelevant to us. You know, our interest should be in doing business with people on an equitable basis where we prosper and they prosper.
Yes.
That's about it. Now, you involve yourself in all of these strategies that are coming out of Israel and out of Kiev and out of New York City and London. You end up in a position where you could go to war at the drop of a hat with Russia and China that could turn nuclear. And people don't seem to get that. We're operating in other people's backyards that matter to them. These places don't matter to us. They just don't.
Well, yeah, it shouldn't anyway. But then you got the Bill Browders there. You got the Lindsey Grahams that are pushing this, and we also have on the news front the Jack Keens.
The Europeans were very clear. This is not a money issue for us. We're going to pay whatever it costs to take care of Ukraine, and we're going to purchase the weapons from the United States and do this. So they are really all in here. And where the president is, he's all in as well. Putin has got to be taking notice of that. He wanted to undermine our resolve in the Europeans, and he certainly wanted to break the will of the Ukrainian people to put more pressure on Zelensky so he would make major concessions. Big picture, Putin has been at war for 41 months. He still hasn't taken significant territory in Ukraine. His presidency is at stake, and he wants those concessions being made by Zelensky, and he wanted them to be supported by the President of the United States. It is not happening. So he has to begin to rethink where is he and how much stake is he going to continue to risk his presidency by this involvement.
Risk his presidency. President Putin is risking his presidency. So what do you make of that charge? Because everything kind of centers on whether this is even a good idea or not, on the contention that Russia hasn't taken, I think the number is like 1.5% in the last 18 months or something like that. Ergo, this is just a pointless war. How do you see it?
Well, first of all, remember, you're dealing with another Army infantry officer who equates seizing and holding ground with success. The Russians have been very disinterested in territory or terrain and preeminently interested in destroying the enemy force. That's how they've won wars in the past, and that's how they'll win this war, by destroying the Ukrainian armed forces. So we need to understand that. It's not what you hold on any particular day. It's how much is left of the enemy that you're fighting. They are going to annihilate what remains of the Ukrainian forces. There isn't much left, Dan. You know that as well as I do, that anybody who thinks otherwise is delusional. But we have a lot of delusional people right now. Now, the second part of this is the implication that, Putin's in a lot of trouble. He could be removed. Well, President Putin is not in a lot of trouble. And President Putin will be there when Trump is long gone, I suspect. I said that about the Obama administration, and I said it when, you had Bush there and others, and people looked at me like I was crazy. He is not going anywhere. He is very firmly established, and he has enormous support inside the country. Support, by the way, that can be confirmed through independent polling, contrary to what the usual suspects in New York City and the mainstream media are trying to convince people. So that's the third thing. And the fourth, the last piece is this. It's back to what we said at the beginning. The Russians are not going to walk away from this until the cancer is eradicated. That cancer will be eradicated. And what's happening right now in these various battles of encirclement is the last remnants of the Ukrainian force are being annihilated. They will be gone shortly. And then the focus will turn westward, and it will turn towards Kiev. And eventually that focus will turn down to Odessa. That's what we're going to see, because I think it's becoming very clear that we will not understand the truth until it is shoved in our faces. And I think that's where we're headed. So everything that General Keane said is absurd. It's completely disconnected from reality. But he's being paid well for that, as everybody else is in the mainstream media.
So do you think that in terms of having that reality shoved into our face when we finally get it, I worry a little bit about if what you say starts to physically manifest, and we'll just stay south for the moment. And if Russia starts moving beyond the current line of contact, they have a breakthrough somewhere, and they actually start putting Odessa at risk. That's where I fear that we could get stupid and potentially escalate this. So how do you see that concern?
Well, it's hard to imagine that we could become even more stupid, but I've been proven wrong in the past on that one.
Yeah, don't camp on that one.
Let's pause for a moment and consider that. The Russians are in a far better position right now to wage war on land in the region, that is Central East Europe, than we are. We have very few forces on the ground over there. What is it? 100,000, I think. And most of the logistical infrastructure and support is provided locally or by contractors as usual. We're rotating troops in and out. How much are they training? I don't know. What's the morale, the quality of leadership? Given Donahue's stupid remarks, it doesn't give me much confidence in the leadership. Then you have to look at the people that live in those countries along the borders. Is there great enthusiasm for marching into Ukraine to stop the Russians from seizing Odessa or seizing Kiev? If there is, I haven't seen any evidence for it. I'll be over there this fall. Perhaps I'll find some evidence for it, but I don't see any. So I think the great danger is that we are going to once again encourage or allow the Ukrainians to engage in long-range strikes. And I don't think the Russians will take it very well, and I think the consequences for Ukraine will be profound. And beyond that, depending upon where these strikes come from and who manufactured the equipment, it could have consequences for us and people living in Central East Europe, particularly in NATO. We've fixed an election in Romania to remove someone who wanted to lead Romania out of the war. And suddenly there was a great reversal. The candidacy was declared invalid by the Supreme Court that came out of the closet and nervously said, no, can't do that, so that we would have someone in Romania that sung our tune. Poland is moving rapidly away from us. And I think if push comes to shove, the Poles are going to tell us to forget it. Then you have Hungary and Slovakia, both of which border Ukraine, that have absolutely no interest in this whatsoever. I think Slovenia and Croatia fall into the same category. Obviously, the Serbs want nothing to do with it. The Bulgars are completely disinterested in going to war against the Russians. So what's that leave you with? Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia? Well, I like them. They're nice people. But independently as fighters, as a fielding real military power, they're not going to add much. And I just don't see very many Frenchmen, Englishmen, or Norwegians, or Danes, or Dutch all lining up for the Great War in Ukraine. So it's all nonsense. But the danger is that if we use these long-range strike weapons, this time President Putin may be less restrained. And remember that we've talked about this before. Our inventories of strike missiles both Patriot and the SM series that we build, that we use in the Navy, these things are limited and the inventories are low, and our capacity to manufacture more quickly is low. And the performance of our air defenses has been very poor. If you go back and look at what happened to Israel in its conflict with Ukraine, right now it looks like only 35% effectiveness for our air defenses and Israel's air defenses. That means 65% of the missiles got through. Well, now move to Europe, and we know that Europe has no integrated air defense whatsoever. Even publicly, they've admitted in NATO that they could defend perhaps 5 or 6% of NATO territory from missile attack. I guess what I'm trying to say is, again, the Russians have the capacity, they have the manufacturing base, and they are also backed by the Chinese, who happen to have the largest manufacturing base in the world. And we've given lots of incentives for the Chinese to do everything but work with us.
Right.
Under the circumstances, I see nothing good coming out of this deadline, particularly if it results in stupid action along the lines that you're saying.
Yeah. Anyway. I want to put this on the screen. This is something you actually sent me earlier today about the damage to U.S. missile defense systems during the Iran-Israel conflict. What jumps out to you on this?
Well, this is from Rebar, but I've run it by some of my contacts in the defense industry, and they sort of said we're holding our heads down, but yeah, it's accurate. What we should take away from this is that 65% of the Iranian missiles fired broke through the air defenses and reached Israel. And only 35% of the missiles were stopped or disrupted or shot down. You know, this is very, very serious stuff. Then look at the consumption of ammunition. And the consumption of ammunition is not a minor issue, as you and I both know. We used up huge quantities of ammunition in a very short period of time. We can only build about 660 Patriot missiles every year right now with existing resources. Then you move over to THAAD, Theater High Altitude Air Defense. I mean, this is supposed to be the creme de la creme. And what's it say? Comparison of SM3 and THAAD. We didn't do very well. Iranian missile hits versus Iranian missiles intercepted. We intercepted very few. I guess what I'm saying is it's not just a question of quantity, but the quality of our equipment isn't very good. And the Russian quality is much higher. It's performing better. You know, it's back to this discussion you and I had a couple of days ago. People were saying, well, you know, Russians had a lot of tanks. They weren't working and so forth. And suddenly it was fine. I tried to explain to people the tanks that they've been using have not been used in the traditional role that tanks are being used or have been used historically. They're used as assault guns and direct fire to destroy fortifications, and sometimes as artillery. We did that, by the way, in Korea during the Korean War. In other words, the Russians tend to build things that work, and they tend to do what works without regard to whatever conventional wisdom says. I haven't seen much evidence for that kind of thinking on our side. So if you combine that picture with the sort of uninformed thinking that we heard from Keane and others, I think we're in for a hell of a collision and a big disappointment.
And there was a separate reporting out I saw this morning anyway. I think it was from the Times, and one of the British newspapers did an analysis that said that the reality in the Ukraine side, a lot of those things there was talking about the Israel-Iran conflict. In Russia, Ukraine claims every day that they have this the past week or so that they shoot down nearly everything that flies, both missiles and drones. But apparently the reality is somewhere around 30% are actually shot down. So even here, all the stuff that we've been giving them is still not very successful in terms of what actually gets through. So that should be not just a wake-up call, because we should have already been awake, but that should be a sober reminder. And so one wonders, is it really knowledgeable? I mean, are they really aware of these things and all this other stuff, like whether it's Keane or Browder or several of these others, Zelensky? they just want to make these claims knowing that we would never actually fight Russia, or would we? How do you see that?
Well, facts don't matter until they do. And right now, the facts don't matter. You can say whatever you want. There's no competition. The mainstream media will repeat your lies without hesitation ad infinitum. So right now, there's only one narrative that really gets through, which is why people like me and others who've been providing a counter narrative have all been criticized or attacked as Putin agents or Russia. It's all crap. But, you know, this is the problem that we've got. These facts will matter very much if we continue down this very dangerous road with Russia. Thus far, we have not had a direct confrontation with the Russians, but we're closer to it now than we've ever been. And my fear has always been that we would lose that confrontation on the conventional level quickly and decisively. The problem is then some damn fool would stand up and say, we've got to turn now to nuclear weapons.
Right.
Remember, we just had, because it was reported that tactical nuclear weapons were delivered to England. We hadn't sent any nuclear weapons to England in 40 years. Now suddenly we've delivered them there. And these are supposed to be weapons that can be delivered, flown and delivered by F-15s and F-35s. Very dangerous. What are we thinking? You know, and then we are shocked when we find out that the Russians have pushed forward nuclear capable forces to Belarusia. By the way, Belarusia has just signed a new agreement with the Russians to the point where these two states are almost completely integrated, where you can run for office, you can be from Belarusia and run for office in Russia. I mean, that's astonishing. But I think there are also some agreements that have not yet been published that are military in character. And I think these military agreements will mean that once this hammer falls in a big way on Ukraine, that we will see an advance from Belarusia south into Ukraine with the intent of capturing Kiev. I think, but I can't prove it, but I suspect that's part of this.
Yeah. Well, let's hope somehow sane minds are found and listened to before we get to that. In the remaining amount of the time we have today, I want to shift gears into the Middle East. You brought that subject up a second ago, and the United States is also has a credibility question when it comes to Israel, which you've already alluded to here earlier today. There is a big issue right now, which is finally belatedly getting lots of international focus, and that is on some starvation of a large number, or growing number anyway, of Palestinians on top of the death and destruction they receive from normal conventional means. And Trump was asked that at the same press conference when he was in the UK, what he thought about the claim that food was being blocked from the Palestinians.
We want to get the children fed. We made a contribution a week ago of $60 million, all going into food. We only hope the food goes to the people that need it, because so much, as you know, when you do something there, it gets taken by Hamas or somebody, but it gets taken. But and we're prepared to help. You know, we want to help. It's a terrible situation.
He talks about that in the passive sense. It's a terrible situation, like we're powerless to do anything, but we're supposed to be the most powerful nation on earth, and yet these people are literally starving to death. What do you make of that?
Between 1929 and 1932, there is an estimate that somewhere between 7 and 9 million Ukrainians were systematically starved, murdered, shot, deported by the NKVD under a man named Yagoda. There was also a Genrik who was with him at some point. These were NKVD types. People knew about it who lived on the borders. In other words, there were people in Poland and people in Germany, certainly in the Baltic states. They were aware of this mass starvation. It wasn't the first one. They'd murdered millions of people before this by starvation. This was just the largest example. It wasn't just Ukrainians, murdered millions of Russians as well. Stalin had a solution to the problem to ensure that people got the right impression. And he sat down with Beria they decided to paint all the trucks working for the NKVD black, and then stenciled on either side of the truck the word meat. Of course, that was a joke, because these wagons would show up in front of apartment buildings and homes in the middle of the night. They would go in and get people. They went into the meat wagon and never returned. They were either executed or shipped off to the gulag. We don't know how many millions of people lost their lives that way. But I think that what's important is that journalists at the time in Moscow reported and wrote back to the New York Times and the Washington Post, the Chicago Tribune, and said, Stalin is doing such a wonderful job of feeding his population. Moscow is completely supplied with meat. Everywhere you look, there are meat trucks. Of course, you know, the people in Moscow knew what was happening, but no one was going to say anything lest they too end up in the meat truck. I guess what I'm saying is what happened in Ukraine and what's happening today in Gaza are very much the same. And the same kinds of people in this case, Mr. Netanyahu and his friends, are essentially perpetrating or proselytizing using the same lies. It's tragic, but these are just lies. And most people are willing to believe them because they want to believe them. I mean, I had a lot of trouble at the beginning with what was going on over there because I've been to Israel several times and I like the Israelis. I particularly like the senior military leadership, thought very highly of them. I remember saying, oh, no, it can't be. None of these things could ever happen. They would never do these things. Well, I was wrong. But I think a lot of other people still want desperately to believe. And you have Ambassador Huckabee, who comes on and makes outrageous statements that don't make any sense. And surely he knows better. I don't know how they managed to do that sort of thing.
Well, in fact, I'm glad you brought out Huckabee because I want to ask you another question. We started this episode off here by you saying that Trump seems to have a God complex, especially when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine war, that it almost seems to be in reverse here because, and I won't show the clips here, but we did in a show earlier today where Netanyahu stood there and just like pounded his fist on a desk practically and said, there is no starvation. It's not true at all. And then yesterday, Huckabee goes on Fox News and says, no, there's not any of that. In fact, these pictures have been put up. It's actually kids who had other problems. There's no starvation going along. And if there is any anyway, it's Hamas's fault, etc. So completely backing what Netanyahu said. But then yesterday, Trump, so at the same time, said this about starvation.
But, you know, you've seen the areas where they actually have food, and the people are screaming for the food, and they're 35, 40 yards away, and they won't let them because they have lines that are set up. And whether they're set up by Hamas or whoever, but they're very strict lines, so we have to get rid of those lines. But we're going to be getting some good, strong food. We can save a lot of people. I mean, some of those kids that's real starvation stuff. I see it. And you can't fake that. So we're going to be even more involved.
So I see Gary's popped it up here. So you just heard the last thing Trump said there, that you can't fake that. There really is starvation going along. You see the kids. And here's what Huckabee said.
This idea that there is massive starvation by the thousands, a lot of the pictures that people are showing, they're not even realistic. In fact, there's one of them that shows a little boy. It's a terrible looking picture, tragic. But it turns out the little boy has a congenital medical condition. He's not starving. And the Israelis actually sent him to a hospital to get treatment. In another case, you see a child that is touted as being starving. He's next to his mother, who is obese. So somebody's eating. It wasn't the little boy, but the truth is he also had a medical condition. Liz, I'm not going to tell you there's not suffering in Gaza. There's a lot of suffering in Gaza, but here's the reason they're suffering, because of Hamas. These are animals. They're savages. They've murdered people. They've held hostages. They've tortured the hostages. They moved their civilians in the front of military targets. They have increased and caused the suffering. And if there's hunger, a lot of it is because when the food does go in, Hamas steals it and then turns around and sells it.
So why do you have the ambassador to the United States ambassador literally just parroting the talking points from the Israeli prime minister, contradicting what his own president had said just hours earlier?
Well, I think that's because Mr. Netanyahu is in charge. President Trump is a bystander. And if President Trump were to say, I'm going over there, get me my plane ready, I'm going in there and I'm going to bring a military escort with me. And I'm going to go in there and I'm going to see what the truth is. And I'm going to personally put a stop to this. You know, when Howard Taft visited Mexico as president of the United States, he took 4,000 troops with him as security. I suspect President Trump would have to do something similar if we were to go into Israel right now to actually see Gaza. But he's not going to do that because he's not in charge. And if he were try to stop that, the people that surround him in the White House, the people in the NSC staff, people that elected him, the billionaire oligarchs that provided the money and the support, they would stop him dead in his tracks. And I think that's a fact. And Huckabee, his job there is to go on and keep all these Christians on board that are supporting whatever the Israelis do. And for him to stand up there as one of these evangelizing Christians and say, no, it's not right. Yes, it's bad, but it's not what you hear. Well, that's music to the ears of Netanyahu and his government. And that's what he's there to do. They didn't pick him for his objective assessment or analysis of anything. Don't be ridiculous. Yeah. Who are we kidding? You know, that's why I compare this to Stalin and the regime that he ran, because when he sent somebody out to look for something and fix something, he didn't ask them for their opinion. They were there to go do it, which usually involved mass deportations and murder. Well, right now, no one is really interested in what Huckabee thinks, certainly not in the Israeli government. His job is to help provide cover while they get the job done. How many times has President Trump said, I just wish they'd get it over with. I wish they'd speed it up and get it over with.
He said it again last Friday, actually, about Gaza.
So, you know, can't you murder another 500,000 people quickly and get this over with? I mean, that's literally what he's saying. And we all know the truth. The truth is out there. You know, Max Blumenthal, one of the bravest people on the planet, has been out there and told the truth. And of course, the Israelis hate him with a passion. They hate everybody. It doesn't give them unconditional support. And that's Netanyahu. And right now, thanks to the ownership of the White House and Congress, he has the unconditional support of the United States government and the unconditional obedience of the United States Armed Forces. And I'm sure Kurilla would make that very clear in the event that we go back into another round with Iran, which I think is inevitable. That will happen too. And we'll be back where we were before.
You know, Doug, in the last bit of time we have here, for you mentioned a second ago about a lot of things that Trump said during the election campaign and how that differed from first Biden and then separately from Kamala Harris, and how a lot of people voted for him based on the promises that he made, et cetera. But when you're talking about especially the Middle East and in the Russia-Ukraine war, have you seen really any fundamental differences between the administrations of Biden and Trump?
Only that I think President Trump has been willing to be much more aggressive than Biden was, even in the Ukraine war. He's done a 180-degree turn. And I think he's more aggressive than Biden was. Remember, Biden, even though he ultimately, what's the right word, sort of capitulated over time. Remember, he said, no, we can't give the Ukrainians F-16s or F-15s. That's too dangerous. That could lead to nuclear war. Remember, he made these kinds of statements. I've never heard President Trump say any of that. He keeps pouring on the coal, pouring on the oil. Now, right now, there's not a lot we can do. I mean, we're talking about providing enough Patriots for someone estimated 17 minutes of air defense.
Right.
And promising air defense batteries down the line in the future.
Yeah.
It's completely disconnected from reality. That you can't have peace in Ukraine and have a regime supplied by us and NATO. That's unacceptable. You know, that would be like saying the Chinese and the Russians can come to Mexico, build up an army, build up a force, and they have every right to build factories there and supply the Mexicans in perpetuity, whether we like it or not. No, it's wrong. So there's a complete failure to come to terms with reality in Washington, but especially with President Trump, because I've never doubted then in his mind, he's being sincere. He just doesn't understand what he's dealing with. And that's the danger.
That is the danger. It's not a good place to be in. But well, I guess we got what we got. We just have to hope that cooler heads can prevail and that we can avoid some of the worst outcomes at either one of these places. But as you say, the trends don't look good. But we'll keep following it. But anyway, Doug, listen, well, as always, it's always good to be armed with the truth. And that's one of the reasons we love to have you on, is because you tell the unvarnished truth the way it is, whether anybody likes it or not. And that's unintimidated and uncompromised, like we love on this channel. So thank you very much for coming on.
Sure. Bye-bye.
And we thank you guys for coming on as well. Also, to let you know that we are on podcasts. Because I know a lot of your friends maybe like to have podcasts instead of videos. So we have that available too. And then, as Gary's showing you on the screen here, we have Substack now, DanielDavisDeepDive.substack.com. Because a lot of people also like to get their news from the written form. So we have that's got a combination of the video, but also some articles and op-eds and things that I write, and just some summation of some of our shows. I think you'll really enjoy that, or some of your friends will. Be sure and share that with them. Be sure and like and subscribe also if you haven't done it, because we really appreciate that when you do it. And we will see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.